So here we are celebrating Lenny's 90th birthday. You didn't actually play music with him, but you were very struck by him, weren't you?
Absolutely. I think from the time I was 7 years old, I first met him when he was master of ceremonies for an event that was the first fundraising event that eventually became the Kennedy Center. And I met him briefly, and then when I was growing up in New York, he was doing the Young People's Concert Series. And so I'd been to a number of them, auditioned unsuccessfully 3 times. Then when I was in college, he was doing the Norton Lectures. And I was always asking myself, who is this guy? Who is this? What was going on in his head? And from reading what he had written and from listening to the music, there's a sort of a composite picture of him in my mind. And I hold him as one of the greatest role models for any musician of any time, because the fearlessness and the angst and the sheer raw talent.
I think one of his great contributions to all of our lives was that he really helped people to overcome their threshold of embarrassment. That when you're on stage, sometimes you think, do I really know what I'm doing? Especially when you're a young performer sometimes. And he really was giving you that empowerment to say, I'm here right now, above all, for people to generously feel that I want them to get this message is the most important thing.
He is willing to be more vulnerable as a performer than anybody else. None of us like to be criticized or to be compared with or whatever, but the fact that he can, on stage, just be totally naked, psychically naked, and is huge. It means that anything is possible. He has access to his conscious mind, to his unconscious mind, to anything that floats through his head. So he's both, totally attuned to a score, a narrative, a story, but could also improvise on the spot.
So you had the opportunity, though, to meet with him and work with him in a very particular way. Tell us what that is.
Well, a particular way, and also at the very, very beginning of my professional work, which was doing a bit of choral singing in New York. And so I was hired to sing in a choir, and he was conducting Mahler too. And it was, I suddenly understood what everybody was talking about, because the music was just seeping out of every pore of his body. And also it was like his life depended upon the performance, this feeling, this urgency. He was so open to the point that we almost couldn't take it, incredibly vulnerable, in the way he conducted.
That word comes up a lot with him, that he was giving and also demanding vulnerability.
But not frightening. It wasn't too frightening. It was exciting. It was exhilarating, of course.
Can you tell us about what the attitude was, what you sensed about his attitude as a music listener or as a music coach? The perspective that he seemed to have.
It's a complex layer of a number of things. The singing, the howling, the visceralness.
And the basso.
Yes, exactly, right. So that's memorable. The other parts, the analytical parts, also memorable.
Right, so it really was kind of showbiz intelligentsia, wasn't it? Because you're saying it was intellectual, analytical, but it was also totally like down and dirty, what do you have to do to put this over at this moment?
It was primal. Yeah, exactly. In that sense. And I think he got to the fundamentals of teaching, performing, and composing through making the music passionate, through challenging his own imagination as well as everybody else's, pushing people's imagination to go just a little further than they might dare. And finally, and I would use myself as a prime example in this, that he was able to communicate all these essentials without essentially ever working directly with a person, and yet my life is totally affected and infused by this man's existence.
I've always loved that quote of Gérard Souzet, who said, interpretation is usually for people who don't get it in the first place. And with Lenny, it was not interpretation. It was about, do you understand? And if you do, what is it that you understand? It was this investigation of, what is it that means to you that, and how can you make that audible? That's what your job is. That's why you're here. And that was just an amazing process. You know, I was never intimidated. To me, that's the greatest thing about really great intellects. You're not intimidated. You're invited to be in this amazing sphere, and you grow around it.
So from the bubbly Leonard Bernstein, it's amazing to hear this music coming, isn't it?
Mommy, are you here? Mommy, should I pardon you? Tell me why your pretty garden died. It was pretty nice and also pretty hard. Oh, was.
There's real pathos in that music, isn't
Yeah.
there? Like you think of in Berg or Strauss or Mahler, of course.
Yeah.
So when you sing something like this as compared to the bouncier Leonard Bernstein, is that a real head twist or?
No, I think a quiet place, which I wasn't at all familiar with before this project with you, seems to go in a completely different direction than anything else I've done, and very introspective, and there's a darkness to it. And even in looking back in the way that he incorporated Trouble in Tahiti into the piece, that it's, you know, there's a real bittersweet quality to it.
But he also tosses things off. I mean, you have a lot of opportunity to say, yes, well, so what? Maybe, you know, that character.
Well, the fact that life, there aren't any simple answers. You know.
It's the same issue we've all been talking about, that questions in his music, always this questioning. Are things the way they appear to be? Well, you remember, I think, that the first project that we did together on his music was the On the Town recording, which was
Could have been.
just
Yeah.
after he had passed on.
Yeah.
And you and Flicka and Tyne, we were all there, and it was so hard to approach that music because we felt his loss so much.
Yeah.
The process of doing the show, it's like we kind of were in our process of mourning and reconnecting with him in some kind of way, which he seems to me very, very much alive today in the musical world, in the spirit of the country, and indeed of the whole world.
Without question. But you know, Michael, you said to me something that at the time was startling to me. You said to me when we did the memorial for him here in this hall, you believed firmly that Lenny would remain in the collective memory as a composer and not as a conductor. As huge as that personality was, you always have believed that it was Leonard Bernstein, the composer, that would outlive in its long arc everything. And I took you at your word, but I had no way to measure that. I see that without question happening today.
I think he's a very authentic voice of, you know, the cares and concerns and hopes of a whole very important generation or two of American society.
Yeah.
So naturally, in an evening devoted to Leonard Bernstein, we're talking about dichotomies and massive contrasts. How can the composer of also be the composer of, and Mr. Hampson,
This is my answer.
so, and it's a remarkable feat, a compositional stunt, really, that in this very moving piece, the melody is played by the cello, and the voice comments on the cello's melody.
I like that idea. I also like very much because it enhances the idea of words in poetry and being metaphor. And what is remarkable about this poem is that it's deeply specific and deeply metaphorical at the same time. And by Lenny setting this ultimate musical language, which you're saying, lets the point of the poem or the text or the profound thoughts be in very strong relief to this musical language. It is a remarkable achievement. It's a wonderful song.
So Bernstein was such a master of recycling his own music, as in this beautiful song, which started out as the prelude to the music theater piece, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and then was completely transformed into this amazing song. But even in the musical language of the song, it makes all kind of references. I mean, I do hear some echoes of Saint-Saëns' The Swan in this piece. Do you see what I'm talking about? Grafted onto My Country, 'Tis of Thee, a little bit.
Yes, yes. But that actually is a picture of his mind, right? I mean, the way he loves toying with words and then with little musical motifs and just picking them. It's like little pieces of DNA that you re-stitch together over and over again, and each time it's a new life form.
And he loved that, because he would point out sometimes references, say, that's pictured in an exhibition. And he'd say, pictured in an exhibition? Never heard of it. And he'd say, as I've told you 1,000 times, everybody steals, but you gotta steal classy. What about his use of words? I mean, he was such a words person. People think of him as a music person, but
he loved words every bit as much as he loved music, no question. We had every word game device known to man, I think.
And mental giotto, that was a big one too, wasn't it?
Right, the 5-letter word game, great for the car.
It was an interesting process with him. It was kind of between a game and a test at the same time, wasn't it?
Yes, everything was fun, even when he was working.
When you measured up to everything, of course, you felt great, but if you stumbled a little bit or weren't quite quick enough, what did that feel like?
Not so good, but we had to get used to it, didn't we? I mean, that was life. You failed, and then you got back on the horse and did a little better next time. And of course, there was that day when I finally beat him at anagrams.
Wow.
That was one of the greatest days of my life. Not one of his, though. It's always fun.
It's playful.
It's so playful. But that was the thing with my father, was that work and play were one to him.
Exactly. I keep thinking of that. That his saying sometimes to orchestras who were being very tough and very tight, you've forgotten that music is supposed to be fun. That was so much a part of his message on life and on music. They were one.
Fun didn't mean frivolity. It meant investing yourself entirely in the joy of something. And so fun was a serious word to him. And having fun was a serious endeavor.
That's why he was able to invest himself so completely in the way that he did, in the subtext of the music. And I think, that issue always of it in art, you always have those two things. You have how and what. And how is very important, how that turns out. But it's the what that's so essential. And he was so focused on what. What does it mean? What is it saying? It's not enough for it to be well turned out. It's got to have that extra something.
Right. The underpinnings and the meaning.
I think he gave that all to us.
Aren't we lucky?
I think so.
We had a good teacher.
Sing, Lenny, it's with the